If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. A couple of friends and I were coming home late from an afternoon/night hike a few weeks ago, and we decided to pull over near a rundown rest stop so my friends could use a bathroom and stretch our legs. It was maybe 8 PM. It's winter here, so pitch black. The area is just thick trees and bushland. There's no houses or campgrounds or anything around. I believe there used to be, but they moved the campground somewhere else because it's on the side of a mountain and it was too dangerous. As we're all getting into the car, I felt sort of uneasy. I didn't want to mention it because I didn't want my friends to make a big joke of it, but someone else woke up and said they felt uncomfortable too, and that we should get out of here. We all agree, and as soon as my friend starts the car, these lights flicker in the middle of the woods. We kind of stare at them for a moment. I want to say there was 7 of them, but 2 of them are higher than the others. The rest are below. They kind of bobbed like somebody was holding a torch, but they were way brighter. We started reversing out of the car park, the car still facing these lights, when suddenly they just sped up through the trees towards us. I don't know how to explain it. It looked like they were zooming towards us super fast. We were terrified and my friend just flung us to get out of there. I'd have just told myself it was people in the woods, except we were driving down the road at 60 kilometers per hour and we could see them trailing behind us, keeping pace in the trees. After a couple of seconds, they just disappeared and the rest of the way home was uneventful. We have absolutely no idea what it could have been. As far as I know, you can't get vehicles into that area since it's so overgrown and dangerous. No person could have kept up with the car either. Now, I'm no believer in aliens and UFOs, but if that's what it actually was, it wouldn't have surprised me. One night at around midnight a year ago, a man pulled into my driveway in an SUV. My driveway is quite large and loops around, and he parked with his headlights set to bright and pointed towards my front door. My front door was open with just a locked screen door between us. Since it was close to midnight, he parked so strangely. I grabbed one of my handguns before heading to the door to double check it's locked. I considered closing the actual door, but if they were to rob me, they already knew I was home. Plus, they could just be in need of assistance. I set my handgun next to the front door, close enough that I could grab it in less than a second out of view from the outside. A man stepped out of the SUV, which caused the interior lights to turn on, and through the bright lights I could just barely see he wasn't alone. The man approached my front door to greet me. I asked why he was in front of my home, and he said he was looking for a friend's house. I advised that he's not at the right place and that he should continue down the road to find the residential area he was probably looking for. He said he came from that direction and that he's looking for a friend's house. He had a smartphone in his hand, so I suggest he used it to call his friend for directions. He gives me an excuse about how his friend wouldn't answer, so I suggested he type in his friend's address in Google Maps and follow the directions to get there. He said he tried but couldn't work it. He said to me to come outside of my house at midnight to type in the address. I obviously refuse and say, "Look bud, it's almost midnight. I don't know you, and you're intent that I unlock my door and come outside to help you with a toddler's type of task." He responded, "Hey man, don't call the police, I'm a vet." I need some help. Please help me and come out now. Now I feel that I should state here that up to this point, the police had not been mentioned at all. So obviously, telling me not to call the police was obviously indicating it is on his mind. I put one hand on my gun before informing him that I would be calling the police and that he should leave before anything bad happens. He started to protest, but I pulled out the gun and slid the side of the barrel close to my actual door. I wanted to show him I was armed, but I didn't want to escalate things by pointing it to him. He fled when I called the police though, but nothing come of it. I thought that was the creepiest thing, that he didn't care about the gun, just the police. Now about 4 months go by and my neighbour had ran into a similar situation with a similar looking SUV and multiple men, only he was asleep when they showed up. A man rang his doorbell close to midnight. He got up. He opened his front door without really looking to see who was there. The moment he did, a man that had been standing to the side of the door out of sight pointed a shotgun to his head, walking him outside of his house. He sat there for hours with the shotgun aiming at him while they robbed him. They didn't shoot, but they did clean him out. He lost everything. They even got his PIN number and drove to test it while he's being held at gunpoint. I don't know for sure if they're the same people, but from the way he describes it, it seems like it was exactly the same people. I'm just glad I had a gun on me at the time. I was driving with some friends at around 2 AM on a rainy cold night along a winding section of road with a steep drop off to the river below on one side. We passed a small pull off and noticed a car with no lights on. It was parked in a weird place. We then capture a glimpse of someone next to it, and as the headlights hit him, we see his shirt is covered in blood all down the front. We don't stop, but turn around and drive back slowly. I roll my windows down as we approach, and he just stands there, blood covering him. The car looks okay though. Couldn't have been a crash. Out of the window I say, "Are you okay?" And over the pouring rain and roar of the river below, I hear a distant and sorrow, "I'm fine," and it gives me chills. I don't reply and slowly drive off as my buddy calls the cops. About half an hour later, we drive by again and there's an ambulance and couple of cruisers. Turns out the guy cut himself and was going to jump off into the river. Scary where your mind can take you. So last night, I was at a classmate's house working on a group project we have due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in town where a university is located, and my classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just outside of town. In order to get to my house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5 or 6 miles. We started working on the project at about 6 PM and ended up having to drive around for a while after we finished our work. So I left the house pretty late at about 11 and started down the road back towards town. I didn't realise how tough it would be to navigate the road at night. There were no streetlights and the road was unkept and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell phone service. I had to drive very carefully to make sure I didn't blow out a tyre as I used my spare a couple of weeks back. I figure I was about 3 miles from the house when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The manner in which it was parked completely impaired my path, and I couldn't drive around it because there was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to get at this point was backwards, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first I couldn't see the inside of the cab, but when I turned on my beam lights, I saw there was a man slouched over in the back seat. His head was resting against the steering wheel, as though he's been knocked out after a bad accident. I immediately sensed something is wrong by the way he just coincidentally came to rest in that position, totally blocking the road, being a red flag for me. I had heard some of the people playing dead in the road, doing so to lure people in so they can rob them. I decided nah, and elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain what's going on. I throw the car into reverse, keeping my eyes darting back and forth between the rear view and the truck. I looked and saw that I was almost on the pull-off where I could turn around. When I look back, however, my heart skips about 5 beats. The man who had been slouched over in the driver's seat was now walking to my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started moving towards it as well. I panic and accelerate backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty bad. As I put it into drive, the guy was already at my passenger side window door, trying to get the handle, which thank God was locked. I was only able to catch a very brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and leathery, definitely a meth head or some drug abuser. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following. Thankfully they didn't tell me, and when I reached the house I explained what had happened and we called the police. I was grateful that my buddy's parents were understanding, letting me stay the night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report and they told me they're on the lookout. But God, I'm even now still shook up over it. I kept getting the same adrenaline rush I got when I saw the guy charging me whenever I think about it. I had something creepy happen to me a few months ago. I was driving home after seeing a play with a friend of mine, so it's probably around 11:30 to 12 AM. I live in a rural part of America, so there aren't any street lamps or houses for the majority of the drive. I was driving over the bridge and saw a car sitting on the side turned over. I wasn't really concerned about it, as it's a common spot for cars to pull over at, even if it was kind of late. As I pass the car, however, I look in my rear view and see that they've pulled out behind me again. I don't think much of it. That's until they began to tailgate me hard, which in itself isn't unheard of since the roads are very gravelly and you can have parts where you can lose control, but not like this. I kept driving for a bit with this car right up on me, which causes me to feel scared and frustrated. Then the car's headlights were put out abruptly while I was nearing the end of the road, which is completely surrounded by forests. This made me freak the hell out because it was still super close behind me. Now I can't see them. The car then sped up and went around me, but almost immediately slowed down to a standstill in front of me. At this point, I was so afraid, so I sped up, went around the car, and drove that way to get past them, speeding like I've never sped before. I rushed home and locked the door behind me. I filed a police report, but unfortunately nothing ever come of it, and as far as I'm aware, they're still out there. It's the late 80s. I'm in my early 20s, and 2 friends and I went camping in Central Florida. 2 of us were working for the park service at the time, so we were able to camp for free in other state parks. Both of us had done a lot of camping before. I grew up camping with my family on every single vacation, all over the state. For the other friend with us, this is his first ever camping trip. We were camping in the youth area, which was empty that weekend, and was quieter and more isolating than regular campsites. Later in the afternoon on the second day of our trip, we were all sort of spread out in the area of the campsite, beginning with shouting distance but enjoying the solitude. I was collecting firewood. Every now and then, I kind of feel like someone was watching me. I look around and see and hear nothing, and then shrug it off and go back to what I was doing. Later on, the sun sets, we have a bonfire started. One of the rangers who lived on site about a quarter of a mile away then comes over with a truckload of firewood and a 6-pack of beer. We all sat around talking for a while, well after dark. We could suddenly hear what was probably a bunch of teenagers messing around on one of the trails a few miles away. Since the trails are closed at sunset, the ranger and my co-worker drove off to shoo them away. My other friend and I were sitting around the campfire relaxing, enjoying the solitude. All of a sudden, I had a cold chill over me, all the hair stands up on my body, and out of nowhere, I'm terrified. I try and ignore it, but I kept on feeling this and it's building now. I didn't want to say anything to my friend. I didn't want to scare her. I glance over at her just as she glances at me, and she said, "Do you feel that?" I said, "Yeah, maybe we should get back to the car." We both felt as though we're in deadly danger, but from what? I have no idea. We start walking at a casual pace, not wanting to appear scared. Then halfway through the walk to the car, we look at each other again, and simultaneously broke into a dead run. We reached the car, jumped in, locking the doors and turned on the headlights. I sit there with my pistol, feeling like I'm totally inadequate for whatever's there. We both sat looking straight ahead. We're afraid to look around. I had the feeling at one point that if I turned my head and looked out the window, I'd see something that would drive me insane. I don't know how long we sat there. It's probably a few minutes, but feels like forever. Then it just left. Suddenly as it appeared. We could actually feel it going away. A few minutes after that, the other two come back. We kind of laughed it off, but I'm telling you, I've never been so scared before or since. I faced a lot of things in my life, but nothing has completely terrified me like that. I don't know what it was, but I'm convinced I was in some terrible danger. A few friends and I had a long weekend off from school and decided to go camping in North GA mountains. We packed a big 10-person tent and loaded up my buddy's truck. He and I had some experience being outdoors, camping / hiking and hunting. He's an army vet, so we packed really well, having all sorts of amenities like a propane stove grill, fold-up cots, portable shower. We were going to be in there for the whole weekend, so needed this stuff. We left Wednesday afternoon and parked the truck in a small town and started hiking into the woods to find a spot. It was a fairly normal hike until we get about 4 or 5 miles in. The first time we noticed something strange was when we came into a little clearing in the woods with a big pond / tiny lake in it. We stepped into the open area and everything stops. No birds chirping, No squirrels running around. Even the clouds and wind seemed to stop moving. My buddy and I both thought, well, there must be a predator nearby, taking out our handguns, just in case. Now, I've never seen a bear in Georgia, so we figure it was a mountain lion or maybe coyotes. My friend and I were looking around the edge of the clearing and he grabbed me. He nodded across the water, and when I started to look, I saw what appears to be a woman standing just at the tree line. She was maybe 150 yards away. We assumed she lived somewhere nearby, so we continued walking past the water and clearing. As we headed back to the woods, I looked over my shoulder at where she was standing, but she's gone. The sounds of the forest returned once we hit the trees. We made a campsite about 2 miles past that, as it was getting late and we didn't want to be stuck building a camp in the dark. We got everything compact, set up and built a fire, popped a couple of beers and started hanging out. There was a girl I was interested on the trip, so I'd been flirting after a while. We snuck away under the fire on the pretense she wanted help setting up her tent. She starts looking at me funny and I say, "What's wrong?" She said nothing, just be quiet. We look outside to the fire. The others hadn't noticed anything strange and we didn't mention anything, but there's a really weird vibe. In the first morning, we found that the propane stove had been turned on, but was not ignited, and had gone empty overnight. None of us had used it. The second morning we noticed some things had gone missing. A lantern we left outside by the fire was gone. My crush's sweatshirt she left on a little folding chair / stool. We figured we just misplaced things or had used them and put them somewhere else. During the second full day, we started looking for a waterfall that we read about online. We were following the river upstream and everything went silent again. My buddy nudges me while we're walking, indicating something's at the top of the hill next to the river. I looked up through the trees and was just able to make out a figure of a woman. Same clothes as before, just standing there. I couldn't tell if she was looking at us or not, but she was just standing there. My buddy told the girls he thought he saw a mountain lion following us and was going to scare it off. He hustled up the hill making a lot of noise and came back about 10 minutes later. He actually ended up telling the girls that he scared it off, but pulled me aside to say that the woman wasn't there when he got up there. We found the waterfall and put it out of our minds as we all enjoy the time there. We hike back to the camp and find it's a mess. It wasn't totally trashed, but it was clear something had gotten into our stuff. We told the girls it was probably raccoons, but we both took our guns with us to bed. Now that night things went sideways. I can remember waking up because my arm was being squeezed. I opened my eyes and I'm being hushed to be quiet before asking what's wrong. There was complete silence all around the tent. I looked across the tent and my buddy was sitting halfway up looking around. We both stayed awake for the next 2 hours until the sun came up, then packed up our stuff and we all headed out. The entire hike back was eerily silent. There's a couple of points I thought I saw the woman through the trees, but never getting clear sight of her. We then avoid the lake completely. Head back to the truck in what seemed like half the time it took to get out to the camp. After we arrived safely on the road, the girls and my buddy started to tell everyone about the moments they thought they heard / saw the woman all weekend but were too freaked out to mention it. She just didn't seem to go away. Some people shouted at her, but she ignored them. The wild part is none of us could describe her face, almost as though it was blurry. I have no idea who she was, but I've never been camping or hiking since. When I was a kid, around 8 or 9, my mum, grandma, brothers and I went camping at a small camping ground about 2 hours away from the town we lived in. We went there a lot, even having a particular campsite we had slowly built up over the years. On this particular trip, we had my aunt's and uncle's dog with us since they were doing military tours. They were both well-trained bird dogs, but usually really calm and friendly. The first night on this particular trip, the star starts growling in the tent at about 1 in the morning. My mum, thinking something's outside, arms herself to investigate with the dogs. She gets out the tent. Star and Ariel would not let her move to the other edge of the campsite, both in attack positions, while herding my mum towards the car. This is while also keeping themselves in front of the tent. By this point, we're all up with a group of 10 and under kids freaking out. For some reason she can't even explain today, my mum packs up the camp, gets all of us into the car to head home. After about 10 minutes out of the campsite, a car begins following us, and the dogs get back in and just growl. By this point, everyone's in borderline panic mode, and my brothers were crying the entire ride home. As the town came into view, you have to cross a huge bridge to drive in, and the car was still following us. And as a kid, you make stories to yourself that nothing is wrong, and the car behind you is just full of scared people too. Yet, as we cross the bridge, the car stops and turns around, speeding back the way it came from. As we stop at the gas station, and everyone near was about to melt down, my mum goes in to buy cigarettes, but Star would not let her back into the car until she could see clearly. This and a camping trip a few years ago convinced me that it's not worth camping for anything. I went camping by myself way out in the middle of nowhere in north central PA. I drove on dirt Forest Service roads for over an hour, then hiked about 6 miles into barely recognisable terrain. There were no signs anyone had been there recently. The trail was almost completely overgrown, no footprints, spiderweb everywhere, etc. I didn't really have a planned stopping point. I was just looking for a nice place to camp, but the trail followed a creek in a valley and was very rocky and not flat. As soon as the sun starts to set, I came upon a fork in the creek with a nice flat spot just on the other side. As I got closer, I see all sorts of stuff laying about. I crossed the creek, starting to look around. There was a trap on the ground by a stone fire ring, about a foot in diameter, that had been chopped with an axe. A little bit away, I found the entire contents of what you'd imagine to find in a hiker's backpack. Basically food, a cooking set, camping pad, first aid kit, etc. All strewn about on the ground, but no backpack in sight. There was a pile of clothes down by the creek that looked like it had sat through the last rain, which was the day prior. A paper towel hanging from a tree. There was an area that had clearly been used as a toilet for maybe 14 days. The strangest thing though was a cage. It's about 4 feet across, made out of saplings tied together. It was framed where the edges of a cube would be, and then had crossbars diagonally on each face, but it would not have kept anything inside because of how open the space was. Obviously, it wouldn't have been sturdy either, as it's made from saplings. I ended up deciding to set up camp there because it's nearly dark, and I didn't have a choice really, unless I want to hike out in unrecognizable terrain. I have a 12-inch knife on me, bloody hell. And I kept that thing on me in one hand the whole time I was there. Thinking someone crazy was going to jump out on me. All night I barely slept. I kept thinking I was hearing things, and then as soon as the sun came up, I packed up and got out of there. Everything turned out fine. No crazy cannibals or anything, but this really bugs me because I don't know what that stupid wooden cube thing was for. I called the forest services and even sent them pictures. They told me they've sent a ranger in to check it out and clean it up, but I've never followed up to see or figure out what it was. The ranger rang me on the phone and said it's probably someone nearby doing something dodgy out in the woods. I roamed up the sides of the valley before I set up camp but didn't see anything. It seems unlikely because how far away you are. You would definitely need equipment. So maybe it's just some weird guy living out in the woods, but why the cage? The creepiest thing I had was while I was camping with my best friend. We're in a semi-remote camping area. It's usually drivable, but you definitely need a 4x4 to get there. It's in a semi-maintained camping area with a couple of fire pits, a few rotten picnic tables, and a rundown outhouse. The park's checked every year or so. So we arrive and start setting up when my buddy wanders over to the outhouse, opens the door. He stands there for a second or two, then closes the door and goes to the second one. He then comes in a few minutes later. He comes back to me and says, "So go check out the first one." I assume something's nasty in there or that an animal's died. But no, there's 3 full backpacks. And I'm talking big bags. Like the bag I have when I go out for a week. Now we get really nosy and open them up. 2 are full of good quality camping gear and nothing's unusual. The 3rd is full of Skittles, bulk bags, small bags and regular. Every size and flavour you could imagine. We camped there for 4 days and never saw a soul. The bags were still there when we left. We let the COs know when we got back to civilization. Who would leave all their camping gear there though? And why did one person have at least 100 litres of Skittles? All I could think is that, though it's dark, a very weird person might have been using them to lure people in like children. This incident happened when I was 6 or 7, so I wasn't scared at the time, because I didn't really understand what was happening. My dad lived in Thailand for around 5 years with my stepmom, and I went to stay with them for a week or 2, and we decided to stay in a different part of the country than they lived in. I don't remember exactly where we were, but we were staying in this beach bungalow hotel place in a non-tourist area, and we were only there for a few hours before this incident happened, but I do not remember seeing a single person at the hotel. The restaurant was empty, the beach bar was empty, and the place was just deserted besides the people who worked in there. Our bungalow/room was about a meter off the ground and pretty simple, with a bathroom, double bed and a single. There was a pretty decent TV opposite the bed with a lot of spaces in between. Also, we didn't know until later that the lock on our sliding glass door was broken. It got dark, and we watched some bug documentaries and went to sleep. About 2 hours later, my dad woke me up and told me that he had woken up and saw a man who had come into our room, standing in the dark staring at my dad, watching him sleep. My dad was a pretty calm person, telling the man this isn't his room and that he needs to leave. But he didn't. So my dad got out of his bed and walked up to the man to kick him out, at which point he walked out the door and my dad woke me up. We stood on the balcony looking down the long narrow path to our bungalow, but this man is nowhere to be seen. About half an hour later, everyone's asleep but me. I was about to drift off when I saw a hand through the glass door turning the light on. We got up and looked around, but once again, there's no sign of anyone. The exact same thing happened 15 minutes later. We jammed the door shut with something and heard a man fiddling with the lock 10 minutes later. We call reception and they check the place out but can't find anything, and they said to let them know if anything else happens. It was probably an hour later. Everyone's asleep but me, and I saw this man unjam the door, crawl on the floor to our bathroom like some sort of demonic creature, turn the bathroom light on, staring at me, smiling. This woke my parents up and we all ran out of there to report it to reception but can't find anyone at all. They then move us to a special room above the reception and we left first thing in the morning. I was too young to understand what was happening at the time, but looking back on it, it gives me chills. I'm quite a loner and like to go on walks just to get some me time. This one night on the 27th of November, I decided to go on another lengthy walk of mine. This one night is on the 27th of November, and I decided to go on yet another lengthy walk. There was something eerie this time though, as I had that feeling something grotesque was about to happen. So at around 2 AM, I was restless and made my way into the cool night with that same feeling of dread that I had earlier. I finished the first hour of my walk pretty normal, with nothing out of the ordinary happening, but lo and behold, I had a feeling I was being watched, bearing in mind it was about 3 AM now, and I was sitting on a bench that was in a park that wasn't very well lit. Now someone else being in that park at that time is very unlikely, as it's a small town and the only people who'd be around at this time are drunk idiots. Anyway, there's no sound coming from the dark figure that caught my eye. He was just standing in my direction, staring. I looked down at my phone and put my torchlight on, pointing my phone towards where the figure was. But to my surprise, he's vanished. Me just being paranoid and extremely tired, I just ignored the weird encounter and decided it would be best to make my way home and get some shut-eye. Placing my phone back in my pocket, lighting up another cigarette, I made my way back to my home, but still had a pretty uneasy feeling of being watched. I am normally not so easily scared, but this feels different, like somebody had decided to taunt me. I look behind me, seeing the same dark figure standing right beside the tree, looking my way. I'm very scared now and put off. I shout out, "Hey man, is there a problem?" You can hear the fear in my voice, but I wasn't gonna let this creep get the best of me. No response from him. Things are getting weird now. I sit there and my eyes widen. This man got on the floor and starts crawling towards me in a manner I can only describe as insane. The only thing I can hear is this hissing sound. Okay, that's really weird. This is such a crazy situation to be in. I just stood there wondering what on earth was gonna happen to me, but in my current state of fear, I'm not thinking straight. He edges closer and I vaguely noticed that something was dangling from his rucksack. I guessed it as sort of a bird or small creature. Anyway, I didn't hang around to find out, so I dashed off a small lane with him seemingly right behind me. I get inside and slam the door shut, but he's nowhere to be seen out the windows. Looking back on the ordeal, maybe I shouldn't have headed straight home because now he knows where I live. But who would have thought right in that situation? I literally ran through my gate to my front door, glancing behind me. One thing the man said to me from in the darkness will always send chills down my spine. Through the window I heard him mutter, "One day we'll meet again, and this time you'll be coming home with me." The events of this night stopped me from being on walks because I still, even to this day 5 years on, fear that he'll come back to do something far more sinister this time. I pray to God he doesn't. I've always had an innate fear of the night, not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that come alive at night, and the safety offered by a house and light. I never had anything to base this fear upon, until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 AM. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night the game went into extra innings, so we didn't have a chance to drop my friend off until well after 1 AM. Everything is fine on the way home, until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It's a T-junction, and I was turning left. The light is one of those you think is broken until it turns on fully green, when you decide to run it. Of course, I pulled right as the light turned red. I would have just ran the light, seeing as no one else was there, and it's now getting close to 2 AM. On a school night, but earlier that week I heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one's looking." For whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I'm a man of character. Big mistake. I was pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteousness, when I happened to look out my window to the left and notice a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We make eye contact briefly, and I quickly look away. It was so late, I could see movement out of my peripheral vision, and knew she's coming my way. I looked out of the window and noticed she's carrying a bag. I quickly checked that my doors are locked and all the windows are up. I then moved my right foot above the accelerator just in case, bracing myself for what was to come. I was hoping that there would just be an awkward exchange, and was praying for a quick light change before she reaches me, so I could just get out of there. I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walks right up to my window, puts her bag down, and began tapping on my window. I nervously look at her. She then motions to me to take the window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button and that thing come all the way down. So I took a deep breath, lightly flickering it. The window moves microscopically down. She didn't notice or care. Leaning in to talk, she then said my boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street, can you give me a ride? I thought, should I stop and give a brief description of the lady? I probably should. She was small, skinny, at an intermediate age. She was either mid-20s or had a hard 20 years on the streets, or she was legitimately 60-something, having a moderate hard life. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She appeared beat up by life, not just by her boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery. It's robotic and seemed practiced, like there was a disconnect from what she was saying. This made my skin crawl. After a brief, about second debate on what I should do, I told her I had to get home and I couldn't offer a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again. My boyfriend beat me up. I live down the street, can you give me a ride? This is the first time I felt more confident when I declined the offer. I told her I had a curfew to get home. She leans in, repeating the statement. At this point the light changed. I slowly lift my foot off the brake and start rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She looked to the light at that moment, looking down at me, leaned in closer and said, "You made the right decision." She then picks her bag up and walks back towards the bench. I peel out of the intersection, screaming and crying the whole way home. I have no idea what she planned to do or what's in her bag, or if there were people waiting to jump my car from the bushes I'd moved to let her in. But that one encounter has honestly changed me forever. This occurred in the early 1920s with my great-grandma Lily. My grandma and my mum have shared this story on occasion, and why black labs are now our preferred breed for our family. This is my first post too. She and my great-grandpa George had recently married, purchasing a nice house in the neighbourhood. My grandpa worked as a post officer, while my grandma Lily worked as a secretary. There were days Lily was home alone, so my granddad purchased a black lab as a pet to keep the house safe. A little information about my great-grandma: she was disabled and would walk around using a stool for balance, much like people use walkers. When she was a child, she slipped and fell in a porcelain tub, breaking her hip and pelvis. She is a very tiny sprite, but very stubborn and independent lady. She hated the idea of a dog to protect her, and the fact that she's a cat person didn't help. She'd ignore the dog and find reasons to complain about him. Georgie, he knocked over my plant, his paws are everywhere, and so on. One day, my great-grandma was home alone on a quiet autumn day. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and she relaxed by her favourite seat at the phonograph and was repairing seams on clothes. The black lab, which full name was Bull, began to restlessly harass her. He refused to leave her side, despite her shooing him. He would lay down for a moment, sigh, get up to wander. A half an hour went by and the dog did not stop this. His sighs eventually turned into whines and distressed sounds and loud panting. Lily began to grow uneasy at the dog's behaviour. A mild-mannered creature such as Bull was either happy or hungry. He never seemed miserable up until now. Soon Bull began pacing more frantically. He went from room to room panting and whining. My grandma didn't know what to make of what was happening, and she put down her sewing and struggled to stand, watching the dog. When she stood, Bull came back into the room, pacing in front of her, lying his head and ears back, barking loudly, snarling. The thought of rabies entered her mind, and she grabbed the stool to put between them. Carefully she took steps backwards, going towards the door, keeping the stool between them. The dog was now pacing and barking loudly again. She reached the bay window at the front of the house, and she saw one of her neighbours in the front yard. She waved at him, screaming for help. The neighbour seemed not to hear her. He was staring at his house, but not at a window, and suddenly he took quick steps towards her front door. As quick as she could, my great-grandma struggled to get to the door, all the while screaming for help. Bull was still barking. He quickly ran towards the door, getting on his back legs, growling at the wood. Lily tried to push him away, but he was too big. The neighbour pounds on the locked door. Stricken with terror, she tumbled back into the bay window, contemplating throwing herself out, when she watched a group of men rush onto her lawn towards the door, thinking that they were there to get her away from the crazy dog. She then watches them wrestle the neighbour, who's on the floor, pinned down. Crying, she opens a window as much as she could, and the dog's going insane. The neighbours pulled her out from the window and helped her onto the porch, explaining they'd seen the man wandering around the yard for over an hour. It was until they watched him charge at the door and pound on it, screaming, they realised what was going on. While trying the door and pounding on it, he pulled a large kitchen knife from his belt, beginning to stab the door, screaming. He was taken away to the hospital crying about Jesus. It turns out the next door neighbour had cancer of the brain, and he'd gone undiagnosed for a while. It had grown to such a size that he lost his mind. That day in his mind, he had to kill my grandma Lily. If it wasn't for Bull, she might have unlocked the door and saw what he wanted. After that day, she pampered Bull and gave him the best food and would let him sleep on her feet while at her favourite chair. I live in an apartment complex with my husband and a 13-year-old baby in a bad area of my city. Last night my husband was at work and kept hearing strange noises from near my balcony. I turned the porch light on, expecting to see a stranger with a toothy grin and knife in his hand. Instead, I see no one, going back to what I was doing. Again, I heard a strange noise and nervously checked. I don't see anything. I thought to myself that it was just my neighbour outside, and I was probably weirding him out by opening the slide door, turning the lights off and on. So I come back inside, shove some headphones on, and just distracted myself from what was going on. This worked perfectly. I forget all about the noises. Typically, around 9:30 or so, I take a bath. I got caught up in something on the internet though, and I ended up not getting up from my kitchen until 10 p.m. Around that time, I arose to bathe. I heard pounding outside the apartment door. I glanced out my apartment's peephole and see no one. I can only see other apartments. I am nosy and decide to wait until I can see a person though. They were really pounding on the door and I was shaken. After probably 8 or so minutes, the pounding stopped. I wait, still no one. The neighbours hadn't answered their door either. The silence continues for maybe 5 more minutes, and after a couple of minutes I walk away. It then begins again. This time though, it sounded like it is on my door. I'm very anxious, and I do not like being alone, and refuse to open the door if I don't absolutely have to. So I cautiously look through the peephole, seeing nothing again. I'm terrified. I messaged my husband and he told me to call our building security. Found him would go silent, then continue for minutes on end. I stared out my neighbour's peephole, wondering what was going on, as I tried to rationalise what's happening. My thoughts are interrupted though, as someone began to scratch at my door. My apartment door's metal, so I could distinctly hear someone's nails. I glanced through the peephole, terrified at a creature appearing, but again, no one in sight. I then decided that I should go to the closet in my bathroom and call security. Right as I'm about to walk away though, I saw something through the peephole that made me gasp. I see a man slowly stand up. I've never seen him before. I couldn't see him before because the way he's crouched down. I'm pretty sure he was waiting for me to do God knows what. I'm so glad I never opened that door.